Hey everyone, today I've got something new for you. This is my first dedicated client build video. In this video I'm going to cover all the hardware that I'm using. I'm going to cover the actual building of the system itself, and I'm also going to have some performance results. So I'm going to call this video Singularity Client Build 1. Even though I've done hundreds of client builds in the past, because it's actually been my job for the past 4 years, building custom systems and also computer repairs. Okay, so now it's time to have a good look at the hardware that I'm going to be using in the system. So first of all, for the CPU, I'm using an Intel Core i5-2500K. This is a second generation Core series CPU. It's socket 1155, it has 6 meg of cache and it runs at 3.3 GHz. So this is also a K-series CPU, which means that it has an unlocked multiplier. This allows for extreme overclocking because instead of just being able to overclock the base clock, which actually overclocks the entire system bus, which means more points of failure, the multiplier, increasing the multiplier only overclocks the CPU itself. So this means less points of failure, which means that you can overclock a lot further. Alright, next up, I'm using a Corsair Force 3 60GB SSD as the boot drive. This SSD uses the Sandforce 2281 controller. It has a SATA 3 6 gigabit per second interface. Its specifications are maximum read of 550 megabytes per second, maximum write of 490 megabytes per second, and it has an 80,000 max IOPS. The memory that I'm going to be using in the system is Corsair Vengeance low profile black DDR3. So I'm using 8 gigabytes of it. It's two 4 gig sticks, 1600 megahertz, 99924, 1.5 volts. For storage, I'm using two Western Digital Green 2TB drives for a total of 4 terabytes. The reason I chose the Western Digital Green drives is mainly because I didn't want to blow the system budget, but also because for what the client is using the system for, these Western Digital Green drives will certainly give enough performance. Having the OS on an SSD was mainly for reliability and also for that extra performance boost, but the system is certainly going to be nice and cool and quiet with the SSD and these two drives. The power supply that I'm using in the build is the Corsair HX 650 watt. This power supply has an 85% bronze efficiency rating. It's a modular power supply. It has a single 12 volt rail of 52 amps and it has a 7-year warranty. Okay, the graphics card that I'm using in the build is a bit of an older graphics card. It's a Gainwood GTX 460. The main reason I'm using this graphics card is because I've had it in stock for ages and I offered it to the client for a very good price, and it's perfect for what the client needs. So they certainly don't need anything more powerful than this graphics card. It will definitely do the job. To cool the CPU, I'll be using the Noctua NHC14. I was actually notified later about the graphics card and the CPU cooler, so the client actually added these on to the order. The case that I'm using for this build is the Corsair Obsidian 650D. For full details, click on the link on the screen. At the Asus P8 Z68V LE. Now this motherboard has a Z68 chipset, which means features such as Intel Smart Response technology and Lucid Logic's Virtue. It's socket 1155, which means it supports all the second generation Core series CPUs. Okay, I've got all the hardware laid out here on the table, ready to start installing it into the case. And before I start installing it, I just want to give you a look at each of the components. I'm not going to review each component, but I am going to give you a good look around and show you what comes with them. Starting off with the graphics card. So this is a Gainwood Golden Sample GTX 460. These were a very cool running card with a reasonable amount of performance. So you can see it's got a red PCB. So this will certainly be plenty of performance for what the client needs. So you can see it as a HDMI, 2 DVI and a D-sub port. Okay, moving on to the SSD. Just give you a quick look around. So it's a 60GB version of the Corsair Force 3. Has a nice brushed aluminium case. It comes with a 2.5 inch to 3.5 inch drive bay converter. It's all black and it has a Corsair logo. Also all the necessary screws. Now for a look at the power supply. So I'll just show you what you get with it first. User manual. You get a whole bunch of cable ties for cable management and the necessary screws to mount the power supply. You also get a Corsair sticker and a cable bag. So all the cables come all wrapped up in the cable bag, and of course you also get a power cable. Now let's have a look at the power supply. So it's not entirely modular. So the connectors that aren't modular is the 24-pin motherboard power connector and the 12-volt ATX CPU power connectors. So you can see the modular connections there. These ones are all for the peripheral and SATA connectors, and these two are for the PCI Express power connectors. So just a quick look around the power supply. Corsair HX 650 watt sticker on that side. And another one on the other side. Just a look at the fan. So it has a 120mm fan, which changes speed dynamically depending on the heat of the power supply. I'll just give you a quick look at the power specs. Just a sticker with some information. So it does have an on-off switch on the back and plenty of ventilation. Okay, now for a look at the cables that you get with the power supply. So you get two PCI Express power connectors, and each one goes from the 6-pin that plugs into the power supply out to two 6-pin or 8-pin connectors. So there's actually two of these, so there's four, or up to four 8-pin PCI Express power connectors. Okay, next up we have two peripheral connectors, and each one has four 4-pin Molex and a single floppy power connector. So that's 8 4-pin Molex connectors and 2 floppy power connectors. There is also 3 SATA power connectors, and each one has 3 SATA power connectors. So that's for a total of 9 SATA power connectors. So an incredible amount of connections on this power supply. That for a 650 watt power supply, that's quite exceptional. It just goes to show how high quality this power supply is. Moving on to the CPU. So this is the Core i5 2500K. Always make sure you're extremely careful with a CPU. They're very delicate. Also make sure you ground yourself before touching one. Okay, so moving on to the motherboard. Just make sure you check out my review on this motherboard for full details. I'm not going to go into any of the specifications now. Moving on to the hard drives. So here we have two Western Digital Green 2TB drives. So they have 64 meg of cache. The client wanted plenty of storage space, but it is only storage, so the Western Digital Green drives will certainly do the job. They actually only run at 5400 RPM for cool and quiet operation. Now for a close look at the memory. Make sure you check out my review on this memory for full details and performance results. So I've already been over the specifications, but they have a low profile black heatsink. They're actually 26.25mm high, and the PCB is green, which is a little bit unfortunate. That's just being very picky, but they do come in a few different colours. You can get these modules with different heatsink colours. So. Okay, now for a look at a last minute extra. So I picked out this Noctua NHC14 which I had in stock. So I'll just give you a quick look around the cooler. So it has two 140mm fans. So it's a downward blowing CPU cooler, which means that all the air gets blown down onto the motherboard. So you can see it has 6 heat pipes there. So this means that it cools the surrounding components on the motherboard, such as the power delivery components on the motherboard, which get extremely hot. So just having a look at the bottom there, you can see the 6 heat pipes. I'm pretty sure they're 5mm heat pipes. And then that built up area with extra fins on it for extra cooling. So those heat pipes go directly into the heatsink at the bottom and almost make direct contact with the CPU. So if you don't have low profile memory, you can always remove the bottom 140mm fan for a bit of extra height with this cooler. Okay, so I've started the build. I've installed all of the hard drives. So I've got the two Western Digital Green 2TB in there, and in the top there I've got the Corsair Force 3 60GB SSD. So haven't done any of the cable management yet, obviously. This is all the front panel connections, etc. So I'm going to be threading all those through the back where you can't even see them, up there in the drive base. So I've got the motherboard in, it's all screwed in, the CPU is in the motherboard, and I've got the backplate on the motherboard for the Noctua NHC14. So that just gets mounted straight onto those mounts that you can see there. Very easy installation. I've got the memory installed. It is pretty much color matched because the power supply is also blue and black. So I made a good choice there for color matching without even thinking about it. So that's where I'm at now. What I'm going to do next is install the Noctua NHC14. Then I'm going to install the graphics card. Then I'll start the cable management. And for me, in a build like this, the cable management is always the biggest part because I'm extremely fussy about my cable management. You know, I think it's very important to have a neat build for airflow as well as for aesthetics. Okay, I have the Noctua NHC14 and the graphics card installed into the system. I'll just give you a quick look around. So you can see that the Noctua NHC14 is completely covering the memory. It's also covering almost all of the power delivery components around the CPU. So this cooler is going to cool the motherboard, the CPU and the memory, and it's going to do an excellent job of it. This system is going to run very cool. It's also got the 200mm fan up above it and the 120mm fan on the back. and they're both sucking the hot air away from the cooler. And then there's a big 200mm fan in the front as well, bringing cold air into the case. And the power supply is isolated, so it's just bringing air in from the bottom and blowing it straight out the back. So the only intake on the case, or actually there's two intakes, and they're both dust filtered. The front is dust filtered, and the power supply intake is also dust filtered. So the other two actually blow out, so they don't need dust filters, but it would be good to get a dust filter on the top one because there will be dust falling in through the top, so I might look into that. So I've plugged all the cables into the power supply that I need. I've threaded all the cables through the back, like all the front panel cables from the case. I'm just going to have to use a torch here because I don't actually have any lights in this part of the house. And the reason for that is that they were blown in a cyclone that we had quite a while back now, and we still haven't got around to fixing them. I have my studio lights coming probably this week, so then there won't be a problem anymore with lighting. So that's all the front panel cables bundled up there, and I've put them out through the top, so you'll barely be able to see any of that or any cables whatsoever. I've plugged all the cables into the power supply that I need, and look how many plugs are left over. So the cables that you can see there are plenty enough to power this build, and there's all those plugs left over. And this is on a 650 watt power supply. It just goes to show how high quality this power supply is. This power supply can power the hell of a lot of hardware. Quite amazing, really. So I'm going to thread all of those through the back now. I'm going to stand the case up. So that's the next step here. Once I get all the hardware installed into the case, I plug all the power supply cables in if it's a modular power supply. Then I'll stand up the case and start pushing all the cables through the cutouts and start my cable management. So that's the next step with this build. Okay, the system is completed. I've finished all the cable management and it's ready to hit the startup button. So I'm going to give you a quick look around the build, and then I'm going to go get Windows installed on this thing and get it up and running and do some testing. Now, I don't have much time with this because I really ran out of time with it. I have to have it delivered by this afternoon. I've only got about 3 hours to get Windows installed and run all the tests that I want to run on it. So I won't be able to do as much testing as I intended to. So because of that, because I don't have much time, I didn't get the cable management as neat as I wanted to. Also, I'm just looking it up because I'll probably just either take it off or move it up against the power supply. Also, the client wanted an optical drive. I always ask because I'd much rather not put one in. It just looks horrible from the front. It means putting more cables up high in the build where SATA cables, SATA power and SATA data cables up high in the build where you don't want them. So yeah, it's something that I don't like doing. It messes up the cable management and it just messes up the build. But anyway, that's all good. It's all finished now. You can see that I used all those cable management cutouts and grommets. Just made the build an absolute breeze. This case was so easy to install a build into and to get it neat. Absolutely loved every minute of it. It was a nice easy little build to do. It was a breeze. Cable management actually only took me about an hour, so I'm usually extremely fussy about it. I just spend ages tinkering around with it, so that's why it takes me so long even when I'm rushing. So there's the cable management there. yeah, I'm not that happy with it, but it's practical. The client doesn't care what it looks like. I'm the only one that really cares what it looks like because I'm fussy, but it'll certainly do the job. Nothing's restricting any airflow. The biggest reason why it's so messy is because I've put a lot of extra, well, I decided to put a lot of extra cables in just in case the client wants to add anything at a later date. I've got extra Molex, I've got extra SATA power cables, so I also had to, this motherboard doesn't have 1394, so I had to tuck the cable down the back. I also haven't connected up the front panel USB 3 because the motherboard does have a front panel USB 3 header, but no converter came with the case from from USB 3 to the USB 3 motherboard header. There's no converter at all, and I don't have any in stock. So I'm just going to have to tell the client to bring the computer in about 3 months' time for a service, and I'll have a converter in stock then, and I'll just hook it up for him then. I usually get my clients to bring their computers around for frequent services because where I live it's quite dusty, it's damp, it's hot, it's humid, it's a very bad environment for computers. The power grid up here is also bad, so yeah, they need a lot of maintenance and looking after. I like to keep an eye on them, and I provide a 3-year warranty as well, so I certainly want to keep an eye on my computers and keep them free of dust if I'm going to provide such a long warranty. The other thing that I'm going to do when the client brings the computer back is put a dust filter, get the dust filter kit for this case, because you can actually get one, and I want to get a dust filter on the top there. I'm not sure what other dust filters come with the kit. I think it's only just the top part, but yeah, that's the other thing that I'll install when the client brings it back. This case also comes with a hard drive dock in the top and a little 3-speed 4-channel fan controller just here. So, you know, that was some more cables to deal with at the back for both the fan controller and the hard drive dock, because, you know, there's power and data to the hard drive dock, and then the 4-channel fan controller had 4 3-pin cables and a 4-pin Molex, so I've got that all rigged up down here. So I have that 3-pin fan controller hooked up to the 3 fans that came included with the case. The top 200mm, the front 200mm, and the back 120mm. So the client will have control of all 3 of those fans. Both the fans on the Noctua NHC14 I've plugged into the motherboard, so the motherboard can control the speed of those fans, although I think I'll just put it on 100% because those fans are dead silent anyway. That sums up this build log. Please click subscribe, like and favourite if you want to see more. Thanks everyone.